Today we're going to talk about confronting the cyber threats and a little bit of background on this. This presentation and the white paper that underpins it is a joint effort between three businesses. Digital Privacy and Protection provides a comprehensive turnkey cyber protection service for wealth management clients. Market Counsel is a leading RIA, regulatory and business compliance consulting firm. And CyberCheck provides risk assessments and fractional cybersecurity expertise to wealth managers. The white paper is pretty comprehensive. It is available on all of our websites for free download. And we tried to write it oriented towards CEOs so they can kind of grasp the situation. There is some technical verbiage in there. And for all of those technical experts, we have many cross-references to the National Institute Standards of Technologies, as well as the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. That's what I got right now. Tony, how about you?
Well, thank you all for coming. Really grateful to be here. It's wild watching a Third Eye Blind and then the next day having an hour-long session with you on cybersecurity. So we'll try and keep this as enjoyable as possible. The way this workshop's going to work is we have about a half hour of planned content, kind of a guided walkthrough of this presentation, and then we'd like to open up for questions. I have a variety of questions I can continue to answer, but I wanted to start by just reading some of these headlines, because I think it's really important to point out the ramifications of cybersecurity. And when Carm goes to the deck, you'll begin to see the challenges we're facing, but I'm more concerned about the SEC and what they're looking at and how they're kind of approaching this with the financial services firms in mind. So the top headline I pulled up this morning, Morgan Stanley pays $35 million SEC fine over data security. A quarter BDs breached email attacks. U.S. SEC chief says cybercrime risks are substantial and systemic. Could one cyber threat take down your whole practice? And then again, SEC says cybersecurity biggest risk to financial services firms. Now, I think before we begin, I think the biggest challenge we look at as RIAs is they're not looking at us, right? They're looking at the big guys. They're looking at the Morgan Stanleys of the world, the Wirehouses of the world. They're not going to come after us. In fact, that's nothing further from the truth, right? The reality is that they're going to look at firms our size because they recognize that we don't have the systems in place, the protocols in place, with which to protect ourselves from these challenges, these threats, these attacks. And now we have more responsibility on the reporting and how we report this as a firm. So hopefully this workshop will guide you through it. This paper is available for free. You can download it for free. It actually goes through every step through this process. Happy to send it out to you all, but it's available on all of our websites too, just to read it. It's great. I read it this morning on the way here just to make sure I knew what I was talking about. But without further ado, I think we should get started, right?
Yeah, sure.
So like I mentioned, we have a guided flow of questions here. I think my first question, and I think I kind of preheated the oven on this, but why does every wealth management practice truly need to focus on cybersecurity?
So just like Tony was talking about to begin with, there's two big reasons, and that is you're two types of targets. The first of all is that cyber criminals are targeting wealth managers because they have information that they can monetize, or of course they have the assets and their custodial assets of clients that they can monetize. Cybersecurity or cybercrime is now a $65 trillion business. It has surpassed illegal drug trade. It's so big. The second reason is, as Tony was intimating, is these new SEC rules put a target on RIAs because it's going to force them into some due diligence. So some of the background, though, about these SEC policies, they put out the drafts in July of 2022, and they put it out for comments. And if you were noticed, they also put out some rules, final rules a few months ago, oriented towards public companies for having a timely disclosure of a material breach. And now they're pretty much doing the same for RIAs. So now they're saying that having adequate cybersecurity is part of meeting your fiduciary duties. So that's a pretty big statement to them and to you. And now, because of that, you will have to self-report a material breach within 48 hours to the SEC. And this is an important thing. The SEC doesn't care how you were breached. It doesn't care if they came directly at your company or if they came through one of your employees or clients. And speaking of your clients, you have to inform them of the counterparty risk that they assume when they sign these very lopsided custodial agreements. Because essentially it comes down to this. If their clients lose assets because of anything they failed to do, like they failed to have a strong password, they failed to use multi-factor authentication, their email was breached and the bad guys got into it and were able to defraud them of something, and it results on you, SEC doesn't care. So with that, now you're going to have to report these breaches, and if the SEC comes forward with an enforcement action, then it becomes part of your permanent form ADV, and you're going to have to report this to every current, future, and prospective client. But now let's stop and think about that, what that means to your business. First of all, if the SEC chooses an enforcement action, now you're in the unenviable position of having to say, yeah, I had adequate cybersecurity, even though I got breached. But perhaps more importantly, what's the foundation of your business? It's built on trust. People trust you to make wise and safe investments. But now you can't exactly say that it's safe. And then the last part is what happens when you go to sell your business? And this we're not sure what the answer is. But what if that Form ADV is assumed by the buyer? Now the buyer has to disclose any of those breaches. And you have to start to think, does a buyer want to take on the baggage? We don't know the last one there, but that's some of the concerns.
I mean, when you think about it, there's 2 points I want to punctuate there. The 48 hours to tell essentially the SEC, like, hey, we've been breached. We have 48 hours to scramble the jets and do this. But then, not that we're thinking about selling our businesses. That's not, I think, as advisors, we think more around, like, how could we help people make their ways through life financially? But if you were ever to exit that succession plan, there's the risk, potential risk, right, that this new firm will inherit that acquisition. And I think that's concerning as well. So now think about it. Most of us are CEOs or executives or just advisors. And if you were a wealth management CEO, you're sitting in the audience now today, how should you think about cybersecurity? Like, what would be the thought process around that?
So a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to ask you to dispel a couple of myths. And when we talk to CEOs, the first myth that comes out says, if I just have good technology, I'll have good cybersecurity. Yes, technology is important, but that's not the only factor. Because it's where people and technology interface is where these gaps and vulnerabilities are created, and that's what the cyber criminals are able to exploit. So we often talk about having good people, processes, and technology. So you want to educate your people to the threats and the processes so that you end up having smarter people, stronger processes, and better technology. The second myth you have to dispel yourself of is to think that you don't have any interest in your employees or your clients' home and personal cybersecurity. Unfortunately, that ship has sailed. In the past 4 weeks, we know at least 8 wealth managers that have been breached. All of them were breached through either the employee at home or the client at home. So we say in the paper that this is like the pig saying he has no interest in the farmer's ham and egg breakfast the next morning. He doesn't have a say. It's really up to the farmer. So you're going to have to take some steps and consider that in your risk calculus when you look for the right people, processes, and technologies. The other part is you have to operate from the presumption that if you're connected to the internet, you will be breached. And since you're going to be breached, now cybersecurity becomes a resource allocation drill. How much resources am I willing to allocate towards this to reduce the risk of being breached? And the third part is, since I'm presuming that I'm going to be breached. I have to put some measures in place as if I will be breached in order to minimize the adversary's ability to do damage. So you've got to have quite a depth in what you do.
I think we're behind a couple slides. So, who are the bad guys, right? Like, I think we kind of fantasize about who these folks are, right? We look at these, these guys. Like, just describe them for me. Like, I think there's two sets, as you can see on the screen, but tell me more about the bad guys and what motivates them.
Yeah, we have two basic groups. We have these nation-state-backed or tolerated criminal enterprises. The big four are China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And if you were in downtown Russia or Beijing, or downtown Moscow, excuse me, or Beijing, and you saw people going into government offices, they're wearing suits, carrying briefcases, and by day, they're out there trying to exploit secrets for their country. And at night, when they go home, they're allowed to moonlight as criminals and use what they know to go after other targets, provided they don't interfere with their nation-state objectives. And then you have thousands of other small but sophisticated criminal gangs scattered across the world, including the United States, who are trying to get into you or your client's business. And what are they after? Two things. Your client's non-public private information, or NPPI. A good NPPI file sells for about $1,000 to $1,500 on the dark web. Overall, this contributes to identity fraud, which in itself is a $54 billion business. And then the second thing they want to get access to are your client's custodial assets, because that's where the big payoff is. They're harder to get to, but they're willing to put in the work.
So just for the sake of this audience, obviously we've all seen it, right? We've seen the phishing and all that nonsense, but what do they do? Like, what is their actual process? Like, how do they approach this?
Cybercrime or cyber criminals are very creative and very innovative. They're some of the first ones to use technology. But they come after you in essentially two different ways. The first one is the direct attack, and this is the one that CEOs gets the most attention from them, and that is, are the cyber criminals able to go into your technology stack, just coming at you with what we call a brute force, try to looking for open ports and routers and firewalls, unpatched applications. And that's what a lot of people and CEOs are accustomed to. And again, they just want to get through those information, into your information systems to get those two things I talked about, the NPPI, and then being able to get access to the assets either through a fraudulent transaction or alter a legitimate action. But the big concern is over these indirect attacks. And again, it's going after where people and technology mix. So first off, you think about these potential vectors, going after employees at work, and then also rogue employees or insider threats. But also keep in mind, your insider threats also include your new untrained employees. They're not out to do something malicious, but they do something accidental that lets the bad guys in. But then also you have your clients at home. And now what they're trying to do is they're using social engineering, trying to get them to click on something they're not supposed to, or either they steal their credentials through some other method. So just to give you a little appreciation for stolen credentials, AT&T was breached a couple months ago. If you ever pay attention to any of this, AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile are routinely breached. What happens if you get all of the client data files from those three companies? Got about 80% of the data on data on 80% of the American adult populace. And that's why they're so routinely breached. But also when they go in, they get their login credentials, and then they take this, and thanks to things like AI, they're able to use this and go out and slam every other site with these brute force attacks, but just reusing their login and credentials, because inevitably people reuse them, and that's how they get in. So this is another way that they get into your employees and to your clients at home. And again, that's so they can get their way in and then start sending you fraudulent messages that look genuine, again, to get behind your information systems. So I talked about this a little bit, but so look at the employee vector attacks as you look on your left-hand side. First of all, again, going after the devices, that's kind of going after your technology stack, and then also going after them at work, their work accounts. But look at all the ways that they have an in to somebody at home. They can go after their devices. Just think about when you're out checking your phone and you put in your 6-digit PIN. It's not hard to remember. Ma Bell created 7-digit numbers a long time ago because they were easy to remember. And now the 6-digit code is easy. Or if you have the swipe pattern, you leave the phone laying around, they're going to pick it up, and just in a matter of seconds, if you're distracted, can load up malware, or just walk off with the device, but now they know the code. Also, as I talked about, some of the ways they can break into your personal email and those messaging apps, and then also you have the social media. People don't know how to protect themselves and how to maintain better privacy in social media because there's so many settings. And now what's happened is their pictures are out there, their current pictures are out there, their videos are out there, their voices are out there, and they're able to be cloned or deep-faked. And then lastly, you have home networks. So your home networks, they all come with a default password. Where do I find the default password? In the user manual. Where's the user manual? Online. So if they're able to get into your home system and they go through your home networks, they're able to do some damage. But now look at your client vectors. All of the same ones, plus now potential direct access to those custodial accounts.
Before we move on, I just want to punctuate something, and I'd like you to extract, you just mentioned AT&T, Verizon, so these are large enterprise firms. I mean, the magnitude of their cybersecurity departments, all of their protocols in place, yet they still fail to protect data. Imagine that. They're spending how much money a year on cyber protection, and they're failing. So imagine the risk that we have as these firms, smaller firms that don't have these policies in place. I mean, that to me is mind-blowing. So I think that's where the rubber hits the road for this audience, is we all have the same question, Carmen, is specifically, what do wealth management, knowing AT&T, knowing Morgan Stanley, they're being attacked, what do we do at the wealth management firm level? What do we do at the small level? What is the process we can take to at least begin the steps of protecting ourselves and our data?
So, let's talk about the basics and having good cyber hygiene. So, what you're looking at right now is a study by the company called Hive, and what they did is they used AI, ChatGPT, to see how long it would take to break down a sophisticated password. So, if you're looking at the far right, a sophisticated password is upper and lowercase letters, numbers, and special characters. So if you're using at least an 8-character complex password, ChatGPT breaks it down in 1 second. At 12 characters, it's 8 months. Go out to 18 characters, it's 79 billion years. Okay, that gives you a little more cushion. This is why, digital privacy and protection, when we do this for clients, we use 20 to 25 complex characters. But also bear in mind that this is based on current computing power. And supposedly it doubles every 5 years. So 5 years from now, what will be the 1 second measure? So don't just jump out a little bit in advance, jump a lot in advance and stay ahead of them. So let's look at some other things that they do. So some things you can do, and this is getting into your default settings. A lot of users don't realize that to enhance the user experience and to even enhance security, supposedly, a lot of devices come with their default setting is to automatically record and save your credentials. And so when you see the opportunity, of course, you're like, yeah, this will make it easier. I don't have to write it down. The search engines and browsers also do that. And they also have many different privacy settings. But all of these passwords are automatically recorded. So when the device gets compromised, the bad guys know how to go rapidly search through it and find those credentials. So then also, here's a couple of examples of phishing and smishing. Now, we've probably seen all these before, and we know not to click on the link. However, thanks to great things like artificial intelligence, they're now able to write much better and much more convincing phishing attacks. So it starts to prey more on your doubt of whether or not you should act on it. But the bigger thing here, too, is when they get behind your wall or they get behind the client's account and to get into it, they use AI to rapidly read all of these emails, and they're able to rapidly determine who are your critical accounts, who do you do banking with, who's your custodian, who's your wealth manager. And they're able to see these emails and then recreate realistic traffic. And then what they also do is they go right to those accounts and click on forgot password. And that will typically generate an email back to that account for the reset procedures. And if they don't have multi-factor authentication, or they're using that email account for the two-factor authentication, then they're able to get into the account very easily.
I think so you have on this slide, and I chuckled when we went over the deck, right? Because these are pretty obvious phishing attacks. Like there's like this, we've all been accustomed to phishing attacks. We get them every day, right? You get them in text, you get an email, whatever. But what's really important to point out here, that because people could become complacent, right? But remember when this first started happening, phishing attacks first started happening, everyone fell for it, right? And over time, we kind of got let's just say complacent, right, and relaxed about it. But now you see these emails and these text messages, and they're very sophisticated. They're visually designed perfectly. Like they're emulating these firms' emails. They're finding these emails within the system, they're copying them, they're sending them out. It's becoming far more, and you click that button, right? Because you don't do the test anymore. And what I think is important to point out here is that the complacency coupled with the advanced developers' AI, people are still falling for this at an alarming speed. And even if you were to really condition your employees to really make sure that they're not falling for this, it's the clients we'd be concerned about, right? Because it becomes so sophisticated. And they don't want to kind of sound ignorant and reach out to you, so they fall for these traps. And that's when we are on the hook, right? Yeah. So I mean, when it comes to phishing and all that stuff, again, it's a matter of people like just not really, again, like they just kind of go in this cadence or this rhythm, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, you've exposed yourself to cybercrime.
You know, Tony, I'll jump in here with a vignette. I have a cybersecurity consulting company, and this happened to one of our consultants. He got an email on Wednesday. It was from his wealth manager. It says, hey, you need some documents. He says to himself, okay, I'll get to it on the weekend. Friday afternoon, his wife had got the same message, and she says, hey, are we supposed to sign something? Didn't we signed a bunch of papers 6 months ago. Are we supposed to do this again? So he says, hey, let me take a look. Takes a look at it, reads it. A very sophisticated, well-written phishing attempt. But there was just enough in there that the consultant recognized it, and now it's Friday afternoon, about 4 p.m., and he's putting out an APB on his wealth manager, right? Voice calls, text, emails, trying to get a hold of him, calling the office, mobile, whatever it took. Gets an email back, kind of like the mass email to everybody in the company that says, please don't open this email, it was a phishing attempt. And because our consultant had some expertise in cybersecurity, went and spoke to him, or not to him, but the whole team. It was a small firm, it's about a half dozen people. And my company ended up getting involved in this, and what we learned is the custodian did the initial forensics and determined that it was one of the senior wealth managers who was on the verge of retiring, actually. He was breached on his home system, and that's how they got in. But you could see that they read all that email traffic because it looked a lot like the email that you would get from Cambridge or SEI or something like that saying you need to sign the documents. Just a little bit more, though, if I can keep going on this one. We also got involved with their IT setup, because the IT provider is where your technology solutions start. And we got involved and we looked and we said, hey, your IT provider, they're not good enough. They either need to provide this services or you need to find someone else. They said, well, find someone else. We helped them find somebody else. They didn't accept our recommendations. They went with their own. And one of my colleagues said to me, they'll be back to us in a year. 10 months and 15 days. So a good IT partner is very important. You can't go light on this, and it's already happening.
What about deepfakes? Tell us more about that.
The defense?
Deepfakes.
Oh, deepfakes. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I think I have something on that. Yeah, so deepfakes, what's that? So that's when they're able to download your voice or your image, and they're able to recreate it. You can buy that software now online. It's perfectly legal for $4.99. Right? It's legal to do one. What's not legal is how you necessarily use that. But this is amazing because a year ago, if we had this discussion a year ago at Future Proof, this wouldn't have been on our screen. It wasn't even an issue. It's moving that rapidly. And we are seeing that already being used to defraud wealth managers and clients from their money. It's really something.
I think it's really important to point out these social media accounts, right? There's, at our firm, you can't even have TikTok on your phone. It's not allowed on your phone because some of these are so prone to not only the deep fakes, but also just the data mining that they can have on your phone and that risk you have. So that's just a small example of like the process, right? So let's get into that. Let's dive into the nitty gritty. Like what can these firms do to protect themselves?
Right. So, before we get into the process, though, it's pretty deep and it's thorough. However, we don't think it's necessarily expensive or complicated, but it's just that there is some work to do. And we broke this down into 3 layers or foundational layers that everybody needs to do. And then after we talk about this, we'll talk very briefly about what else certain type of business models needs to do. So we've got these 3 foundational layers, and some of them have some sub-layers. So looking at the first one, the direct attack defenses, there's about a dozen up there. I'm not going into all of them, but I would say probably 8 or 9 of them you will find in the more robust cybersecurity insurance policies. And they're all things that your IT provider or managed service provider needs to be able to do for you. If they can't, you need to go find another one. Please note on the very bottom right, though, that last item, that annual cybersecurity audit, we think that's going to become necessary because, again, you're going to have to prove to the SEC that you have adequate cybersecurity and that you're giving it the due diligence and annual review or a periodic review that's necessary. Have your lawyer, though, hire that firm to do it so the results are turned back into the lawyer and you're not giving the SEC a roadmap, in fact, if you ever are breached. The second layer, and this is the indirect attack defenses, and you can see there's 4 sub-layers. This is the layer that no one's paying attention to. And this is where you get into clients and employees at home and at work, and what are some of the risk mitigations that you have to do. So looking at this client cybersecurity, you have 2 things you have to do. Is the client should create a personal digital protection structure and then also get adequate cyber education. The cyber education is training on how to use the technologies and then also training and understanding of who are the threats and how they're coming after you, and then periodic updates on that because the threats are going to change the way that they act. But look, what goes into this personal protection structure, and why does it matter so much? I want to talk about some of those key technologies that are up there. The first that's most important is a password manager. Most of us have a couple of hundred or so or more accounts. It's pretty tough to remember every password.
I use Post-it notes. That's what I use.
Yeah. No, that's a good method. If you don't have a password manager, use Tony's Post-it notes. Yeah. Of course not. No, and then also you want to have a virtual private network or VPN, and that's to secure your signal, especially when you're mobile, you're traveling, you're at hotels, Starbucks, or whatever.
So can you, before you go on,
Yeah.
can you explain to me, like I'm 5 years old, what a VPN is?
Okay. Yeah. So let's try this.
Not
Yeah.
5. You can
Yeah.
take it up a notch. But.
So picture your signal, all right? When you send an email and you send it from me to you, the traffic that says you@outlook.com is visible to anybody monitoring that transmission. What a VPN does is think of it like wrapping a piece of wire around that transmission. So, well, I'm sorry, it says me to you, but then it says, here's all the things I want to do. That whole email is transparent. It wraps a wire around most of that so somebody can't read your email. Does that help?
So it's like a protective layer over it. So
Yeah.
it's the protection between the two endpoints, one email to the next. It's almost like a piece of plumbing.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a pretty good analogy.
So if you're at like Starbucks or a hotel, you're on a public network, and essentially all that traffic can be reviewed, consumed by a bad guy
Yeah, potentially, yes.
without a VPN.
Yeah. Now, if you were smart, a good bad guy, you'd probably position yourself in between the Starbucks, the Popeyes, the Chipotles, and the Wendy's, and you get 4 signals
So you'd be,
instead of 1.
yeah, so in your car, and you get 4 signals. That you're, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You get as much as possible. Anything else?
Nope.
You
No,
gonna
sorry.
VPN? No,
Sorry.
that's okay. No, it's a fair question. Some people don't understand it. Then the other piece is this anonymous private email. And what's that mean? Well, for example, you've got your joe.smith@gmail.com, @outlook.com, yahoo.com. Guess what? All those free emails, anybody remember what Tim Cook said when under congressional testimony? If the product's free, you're the product. They sell your data. They sell the keywords that are in your, they don't sell the email traffic, but they sell keywords that are in it. That's how you get some of these targeted spam mails back. But this is also how you get spam. Private email, a company who does this doesn't sell your data. And this is a special account that you're just using to protect your critical accounts, like your bank account, your brokerage account, your custodial account, your transmissions with your wealth manager. And this way, those companies have to be breached in order for the bad guys to get that email. You're just not readily giving it away to them.
I actually found, when I was researching this topic, I found something very interesting as it relates to emails. Well, 2 things. One, I'll start with this. Everyone shops at Amazon, obviously, right? And you'll get the email about you just made this purchase, and then you'll get another email, of course, when it's delivering. And if you've noticed something about that, Amazon does not reveal the product or the price in those emails. And for the longest time, it struck me as a bad user experience. But they actually do it because they know they're delivering it to Google, a Gmail address or a Hotmail address, whatever, and they recognize that that data can then be mined for those shopping preferences. Then Google can use that to advantage on repricing their products on their stores. So you begin to realize that even the companies recognize that free email systems are just as prone to kind of this data mining. The second point I realized, and I learned not the hard way, but I thought I was all sophisticated, and I bought myself a nice secure email, personal email. It's kind of but you realize it's only the one end that's protected, right? When you email someone else, you don't recognize that. If you're emailing someone at Gmail, yeah, your end is protected. The data mining is not happening on your side, but it is on the other side, which I think is a fascinating thing when you think about it, because you're trying to protect yourself, but unfortunately, the other side of that communication is not most likely.
Right. Now, so if you ever see something unique, I just saw one the other day, just kind of popped in, and they were using the same header, like mail group that we use. And I was like, well, where'd they get that? And I think they got it from the distant end.
Sure.
From who we sent it to. So other measures, when we talk about this personal cybersecurity structure, is so getting into a password manager. Again, most of us have several hundred accounts. You get into a password manager, you want to scoop up all the passwords that are out there on the operating system, like Apple Keychain or in your search engines and browsers, and consolidate them into the password manager, go through, reset all of those passwords to something complex, 20 to 25 characters long, and then the user only has to remember one complex password. And that one, definitely, Tony, you don't want to put on your Post-it, okay? And then also going through the devices and locking them down, all these security and privacy settings. So for example, an Apple device has 60, a Windows device has 120, a Meta platform account has 83 settings, and LinkedIn has 113. And you have to go through and you have to lock them all down in order to maintain good cybersecurity and privacy. But a lot users can do this themselves, but a lot of people don't know where these are or don't have the time. So the next sublayer is this risk-based interaction. And so based on what we just talked about, you're going to have to make a determination of what is your client's personal cybersecurity to help determine what are the processes that I'm going to use to validate communications and confirmations. Because now, because of the bad guy's ability, you don't know exactly who's on the other end, and you're going to have some other measures and how they interact with your employees. Now, your employees, of course, you're providing them the best cybersecurity at work that you can. And the things we already talked about, the technologies, sophisticated passwords, and having locking down the privacy and security settings, no kidding. But now you also have to think about what they're doing at home. Because if they're doing this at home and you're using this device in any way to communicate remotely back to the company, that's bringing in the risk. So all the things that I just talked about that you do for your client, you're going to want your employees to do too. And then also they're going to need training and education, but they're going to get some extra because the threats they get at work are not necessarily the threats and tactics that they're going to see at home. And now this last layer is this insider threat management, and this is where the SEC is telling you to take action. So really quick, 3 things. One is you're just going to have to limit who needs to know and who needs to use or be able to download. Not everybody in the firm needs access to all the client information. It's going to have to make better determinations on who can do this. And then also employee oversight, especially studies show new employees and outgoing employees. New employees come in with 2 biases. Either A, they're there to benefit themselves and get your information and sell it or use it to their advantage, or they're just untrained, and that's where they're going to make unwitting mistakes. But then, of course, employees that are departing, if it's under bad terms, they might be vindictive, or even if it's just something good or innocuous, they want to move out on their own, they might try and take information with them because they want to build out their book. And then lastly, you have to think about the physical security. Who else has access to these devices, or at least by proximity? For example, the Israelis have developed a technology using a smartphone and its Bluetooth. It can download the contents of a nearby hard drive if its Bluetooth settings are left on. And sometimes organizations, people don't know that that's the default setting. That's a reason, for example, like the military, you can't bring a smartphone into a secure facility. So you might want to think about vetting your cleaning crews and making sure that they don't have any unintentional access.
Before you go on,
Yeah.
I think one of the things about insider threats that we really have to point out is that the vindictive employee, right? So someone has access to the data, they pull it down, right, and then they do something with it, right? And you might say to yourself, well, that wasn't our fault, right? There was a vindictive employee, but that doesn't even matter. Doesn't matter, right, at this point?
True. The SEC doesn't care.
Yeah, they don't care. SEC doesn't care. You could say, okay, well, it's really not our fault. We had all the protocols in place. This person, performed a bad act upon exit, but SEC is like, not our problem. It's your problem.
Exactly. And it doesn't matter if they download it and put it on the dark web or if they print it all out and walk and leave it on a street corner. It's still a breach.
Wild.
We just think about the cyber breach, but it can happen physically as well. So then the final sub-layer here is the damage reduction, or this is the final layer of the foundation, is the damage reduction defenses, and this has 2. And again, this operates from the premise that you're going to be breached, so you want to put some things in place to mitigate the breach after it occurs, and that's complicating and stealing the MPPI. So first thing, I don't care if you're a wealth manager or a construction company. Every company out there has tons of unnecessary data. First thing you want to do is go out, at least annually, purge it, remove it. If you think at all that you should keep it offline. And keep it for another year offline. And then see if you really need it. Secondly, if you're going to store NPPI, do it in the cloud. These cloud providers offer better protection, better disaster recovery and backup possibilities than you can probably do with an on-prem server. So it's worth your time and effort to use that. And then lastly, you also have to think about segmenting and compartmentalizing client information. And again, goes back to who needs access to it in order to do their job. And when we talk about segmenting, it's breaking up the network and compartmentalizing is breaking up the information, but putting extra credentials on it. Maybe perhaps you need some additional type of authentication to get into a different part of the network or to the client information.
So,
Yep.
yeah,
Just
please.
keep going. Yeah. So just to wrap this one up, is you want to put some processes in for controlling your transfers. For example, if you're still transferring to new accounts, hey, I need money transferred to this new account right now, you're crazy, right? Don't do that. You can only go to an existing account. Because if you kind of jump to number 3, if I want to create a new account or do another transfer, you're going to have to require some amount of diligence. If I have an account with Chase and I want to start a new one, a new account, you've got to come in, bring yourself and some ID and prove who you are. Your wiring instructions. When the bad guys get into your network, they just don't go right after the money. They poke around and they do some investigation because they want to see how do you do business. So this might sound a bit counterintuitive, but take those wiring instructions and keep them offline. Those print the instructions off and keep copies on the desk or with each team or whatever's necessary. But if you're leaving them online, you're leaving your processes out there for the bad guys to discover. And then the last piece here is this client education. And you need to educate your clients of why you're doing this. Why is it so hard now to make a new account? We're doing this because we're exercising our fiduciary responsibilities to protect you. And that will make a big difference when your clients understand what you're doing.
So that was a lot to take in. I think that's like the foundational cyber defense, right? That would be the best protocol we've identified for this. But what other steps can we take as wealth managers?
Sure, and I'm going to go through these a bit more. I'm going to go through pretty fast here, though, just so we can field some questions. Recognizing that, that there are different business models, so not everybody does the same thing. But again, we're operating from the premise that we're going to get breached, and the worst thing that can happen is NPPI is stolen, or they get access to our custodial accounts. So what are those additional measures? So the first one is what we call Tier 1. These are your traditional wealth managers. 4 things you need to do for what we call the enhanced damage reduction measures. 1, store all your MPP offline. Wait a second, I need that Social Security number to create the account. That's right, but you don't need to leave it online. That person, how often do you need it? About the time whenever you create a new account. So again, keep it offline. No downloading client information from third parties. So when you go to the tax preparer site, don't download their Social Security number and their address. You already have all of that. You just need to get the numbers off of it. If you're going to store your client online information anonymously, well, what's that mean? You're going to need to use like a random number generator to generate a code for your client. And again, you can print off these codes and everybody can have them on their desk so they can go back and reference who the client is. Now, that might sound very onerous and a lot of work, but for example, it's not. Digital privacy and protection, we do that in order to protect our clients' identities. And the last piece is air gapping your client account trading. Again, that sounds pretty hard and unbearable, but what we're saying is, most of you have long-term investors. So your trades are infrequent. You want to have a separate system that's not connected to the rest of your business enterprise. It's a standalone system, or maybe 2. You're using probably a cell phone connection. You still have all the same security measures on it that you can put on a standalone device, and you're using that to communicate. and do your trade.
Yeah, so I think
And who hates me right now?
I think you mentioned something, and I know you're going to cover this topic next. The idea that taking NPP offline, like there's firms, bill pay firms, tax preparation firms, like they can't do that. How do they take it offline? If they can't do it, what would they have to do then?
So if you're in a position, for example, like a multifamily office, and you use MPPI more regularly, is you still want to make a determination of what you really don't need, and again, separate that and keep that offline. But for that is left online, you're going to put in some increased measures. And again, that enhanced segmentation and compartmentalization of the network and information, fancy way of saying you need more additional credentials to move about the network and get the information. You'll want to do some third-party penetration testing. And again, have your lawyer hire the firm so they turn in the results to your lawyer and you're not leaving the SEC a roadmap. You're going to want to add some additional protection or software through intrusion protection and detection systems. This will look for anomalies coming and going from your network. And then also the data transfer and alerting systems, and this will notify you, especially when data is leaving your network. You really want to be aware of why am I losing, 100 gigs of data at 1 a.m. on Thursday nights? That might not be a good thing. And then lastly, though, you still want to air gap those client trading measures.
What about zero?
So this last one is what we call the Tier 3, and this is for the investment counselors. So in addition to everything that we just mentioned for Tier 2, is now you're moving to a zero trust framework, and that means the company owns and manages every device, including the cell phones, the laptops they take home, whatever it is. So you really don't have necessarily, even your remote employees are going to be using a company device. You're going to want to have some enhanced firewalls and intrusion protection systems. And when we say this, you're probably looking at either having your own security operations center, a SOC, or at least a SOC as a service application overlaid on top of what your managed service provider is already doing for you. Because you've got all these company managed devices and the like, you're going to need to expand your IT staff, and then you're going to want to go hire a full-time chief information security officer. They're not cheap. There's about like a 700,000 vacancies for these positions across the global workforce, so they can command a good price. And the good thing is, for all you chief compliance officers, you now have somebody who's a bigger enemy than you, and that's your CISO. So I know that's been a lot. The information, the white paper is available on our websites for free download. If anybody wants to have a one-on-one later on, our information is in the future-proof guide, and we're happy to have a one-on-one, but right now let's take some questions.
Yeah, so we did pretty good. We wanted to have 15 minutes of questions available to the audience, and we actually have 15 and 36 seconds, which is incredible. And look at this, we have questions coming up. Before I ask that question, I think it's really important to point out everything you've seen today is available in the white paper. It is fully free. It goes to all the protocols and steps. So you can download that paper, print it up. It's great reading material, but at least it gives you all the framework and protocols to protect your firm from bad actors. So we have some questions, which is awesome. How do the financial implications of a cyber breach compare to the costs of implementing comprehensive cybersecurity measures for wealth management firms? That's a great one.
Yeah, it is. And we looked at it, and for example, a traditional wealth manager, we estimate to be the cost of implementing of what we said in the neighborhood of 20 to 25,000 a year. So, and I think it's also worth saying is there's the initial implementation, but over time you can get reduced costs. So that kind of helps frame how much, what's my risk threshold on this.
Sure. So 25 grand a year in extra protocols and frameworks versus the cost of a breach and the impact of your business. As you mentioned before, the exit value potentially, with that being on your ADV, client flight, right? Because you have to communicate this to all your clients. Some are going to leave you because of the concerns they have. Therefore, you can see the economic impact of that on your business as opposed to paying a few $1,000s a month for the proper protocols. So I think it's obviously a win-win, right? But again, it goes down to the SEC saying, if you truly are a fiduciary, right, cyber protecting NPPI and everything else is part of your responsibility as a wealth manager. So it's not even an issue of cost versus savings. It's an issue of like, it's a requirement. It literally is now an expectation. How are client expectations around data security evolving, and what does this mean for wealth management firms?
Yeah, no, I think that this is becoming, this is on everybody's mind. And whenever you talk to a potential, like a DPP, whenever we talk to a potential client about our services, they're like, I really need to get a handle on this. I'm very scared about it. And in fact, we get a lot of older clients, but they're able to grasp the technology and make it work. But this is just one of these issues now that it's really peaking. So,
I mean, but more to that point, right? Like, I get an email once a month about my data being like somewhere. Like, I get alerts that it's on the dark web. You know, there was a breach here. I was an AT&T customer. Like, people are desensitized to it. What makes like an AT&T breach with your PII different than, say, a wealth management firm and the ramifications that can happen there?
yeah, no, that's a really great question because I'm a 3-time victim of big data breaches. So the Office of Personnel Management in 2012, the Chinese breached it. That was when I was working with the government. So they got all my data. They even got my fingerprints.
Wow.
In 2017, I was buying a house, TransUnion. And then just a couple weeks ago, I was notified that I also turned up on the dark web due to the National Public Data breach. Okay, so as the individual, it's a pain, but it's not the end of the world. You can just go through, notify your banks and the credit companies and put a hold on anything new for the past, or a watch or something like that for the next 6 months. The big deal, though, is by federal law, if the lenders make the bad loan, it's on them, not you. So you don't have to worry about that. So it's actually, the theft is less impact, most of all, probably to the client or the individual, but you still have the responsibility as an RIA to protect this information. So the bigger problem is now on you and then potentially any of those lenders who make a bad move.
Sure. Let me just ask this question here, and then I'm going to ask my own personal question. But let's start with this one. How are firms leveraging technology such as AI and machine learning to enhance their cybersecurity protocols?
Yeah, I think you're going to see most of this in the solutions that you use. So a lot of the intrusion protection systems and those things like the Security Operations Center as a service, those type of applications are able to use this and quickly monitor the trends and make adjustments. And then also the software application companies are also able to monitor the trends and make quicker adjustments. So you should actually see more patches, statistically speaking, because they should be able to stay ahead. But they've got a lot of threats coming at them. So mostly on the software side.
Sure. And before I go to my questions, another great question here. How do you it reads a little different, so I'm just going to kind of like paraphrase, but how do you measure your effectiveness? Like, how do you, like, you put these protocols in place, and like, is that it? Or is there a measurement? I mean, like, we talked about pen testing and the frequency of that, but like, how do you measure the rest of your protocols?
Yeah, that's always a great
The hope and a prayer, is it?
Yeah. You know, did it happen? Did it not happen? And really, the best thing there to try and measure is there are, depending on the level of defenses that you have in place. So, for example, some of these intrusion protection systems can give you indications about the number of attempts that you have on breaches. And then also even things like email filtering can also give you feedback. They can give you some quantitative feedback about what types and how much junk mail you're getting or phishing attempts. So you can see by the volume of what is detected, give you some appreciation for what's going on. But again, you really kind of have to get into the audits, or I guess another way is you should think about when you're training your employees to have kind of like those embedded fake phishing emails, where if they click on it, you know it, and now they get some remedial training. But again, this is another indicator of the success. And by the way, you should get something that increases the level of sophistication. Because then again, it's a good measure of how well your people are doing. In addition to that, any of the audits, we can go through and measure where you are in that time. Because your network and your threat are constantly evolving.
That's actually a great segue into the next question, which was, how do you cultivate a culture in the office with your employees around cyber protections? How do you foster a culture of being mindful?
Yeah, I think that the enterprise-wide training with the fake phishing emails and some of those companies that offer that are helpful. Also, a positive environment. You know, when you're not in breach mode, in breach mode, you're going to be like, hey, it's gotten more calming. It's, hey, we're going to get through this. But just to be, positive and encourage your employees to stay on top of it. But really, for the leadership, set the best example. Don't look for shortcuts for yourself. I know you're busy and you want to get things done, but you're the one who really sets the tone for the business.
I love this one. Thanks, Craig. This is a good one. This is going to split the audience in half, I think. Do you have an opinion on safety between Mac or PC devices?
I have
you only have 8 minutes to answer.
I have an iPhone and a MacBook and a Mac desktop.
And so he's a DoD guy. He's been 20 years at the Department of Defense. So
yeah.
if you're leaning on Mac, so you're taking a side.
Yeah, so yeah, I did. I used Microsoft when I was nearly 30 years. But anyway, first thing I did is I'm going Mac. So
that's great. I love this question too, because I think this impacted most of us, right?
Yeah.
Can you comment on the CrowdStrike outage from earlier this year? I mean, I think the whole country.
I know some people at CrowdStrike. Kind of sucks to be them. I mean, it is. Hey, I thought it was kind of bad form on their part to kind of pin it on Microsoft. They tried to pin some of it on Microsoft for not having an update. I was like, wait a second. Microsoft, you're the ones who kind of panned Microsoft for not giving you access to what they call the kernel, which is kind of like the core of the software, and they had access to that. Big thing is they didn't test it before they went live. Obviously, they didn't do enough testing before they went live.
And then there's a lot of finger pointing. I mean, you had Delta pointing at Microsoft. Southwest is running on Microsoft 3, so they were fine. You saw all this. It was crazy, and it was finger pointing, and no one's to blame, but everyone's to blame, right?
How does this pertain to this discussion it actually is quite germane, because the expectation from the SEC is, hey, Delta, you had a breach. You need to report this. And Delta's like, not my fault at all. It's completely on CrowdStrike. But they're kind of going back and forth on that. And Delta's not the only company that was severely impacted by this. And it's still kind of like, okay, when are we going to see these reports of a breach? And there's one little caveat, though, I can talk about with regards to the public companies. And when they're reporting within 48 hours of identifying a material breach, it's not so much that you identified when the breach occurred, because the breach could have occurred, you might not detect it for 60 days. So now you're already out of that 48-hour window. Not exactly. It's, okay, now you detected it, but now can you make a determination that it caused damage? And that does take some time and introspection by the company to make an assessment of, and I don't know what the verbiage will say, but if it's similar to what we see on the public companies, is the verbiage is along the lines of, would a reasonable investor think that A, B, C, or D? And that's kind of the question that you're going to get.
All right, I got one more question, and we'll let you guys go, unless any more come up. And I asked you this when we did our prep, because I think we talk about business impact, economic value, shareholders, and the responsibility there, of course, the fiduciary duty. And I asked you this, and I loved your answer, and please extrapolate. I said, is there a chance that the principals or executives of these firms are personally held liable for cybersecurity attacks.
Yeah. So
This is where it hits the wallet,
Yeah.
right? This is where the rubber truly hits. Obviously, we want to protect data. We want to protect our clients' PII, but there's a certain point where can you be held at fault?
So the best example I can look at right now is the SolarWinds breach. Now, the SolarWinds breach occurred before these SEC rules were in place. However, based on their investigation and their back briefs, the SEC and the Department of Justice are going after their chief information security officer. Very interesting dynamic.
So he's being prosecuted.
Yes, yes, he is. Now they're saying he was fraudulent in his reporting. So therein, though, I think you can extrapolate that there is a possibility of liability can be put onto anybody in the executive suite. What's interesting about the SolarWinds situation, though, is that the company's CEO and the rest of the company are backing their chief information security officer. They're not throwing him under the bus.
Not yet.
This is going to be a very interesting case to see what happens.
Yeah, that's, I think, at the end of the day, we have to obviously be mindful about it and really put these protocols in place. But there's reputation on the line. There's brand reputation. There's the risk. And, of course, there's the SEC looming over all of us. So I think that's it from our side. Thank you all for attending today. Honestly, we are touched that on a Wednesday morning after an incredible night out at this concert that you woke up and said, I want to learn from Carmen and Tony about cybersecurity for an hour, and you sat through it. So thank you for that. But please remember, you can download this full white paper. This is the smart one, all right? I'm not a cybersecurity expert. He's done this for 20 years with the DoD. He's on his own now, so he's happy to field any questions offline. But make sure you download the paper, enjoy it, and recognize fully that at the end of the day, we're responsible as RAs to protect our clients' data and do everything we possibly can to implement protocols and frameworks at your firm. So thank you again for your time, everyone. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the festival.
And thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Carmen.